Right, I'm going to move on now and switching themes completely, so you need to put your mind into a different gear, and we're going to talk about IoT roaming and monetization. So this is probably by my membership of the working group, this has got the widest number of members. And so what is it about IoT, global connectivity, IoT roaming that's interesting? Start with a few numbers. I've taken these from Kalido Research, and they produced assessments and forecasts looking at total consumer and IoT mobile data roaming traffic, which is growing from 737 petabytes in 2019 to 2,000 petabytes in 2024, with a yearly growth rate of 22%. And in terms of value, they're seeing that wholesale consumer mobile revenues are around about $16 billion in 2024, with IoT roaming adding 5.7 billion to that figure. Probably something somebody wants to discuss in a little bit of time. So we're seeing that, you know, what is IoT roaming? It's anyone who's got the demand for international or coverage that is more than one network. We're also seeing that a lot of the global enterprises are starting to adopt IoT solutions. There's quite a bit of competition in the market, and this competition is driving the prices down. So we're seeing that smaller enterprises are starting to come into the market. The consensus seems to be that there are quite a few significant markets, USA, China, and Europe, to name a few. There'll be growth in developed Asia Pacific, and we're starting seeing growth in emerging markets such as Latin America. So the focus at the moment is capturing value and demonstrating an attractive return on investment. So what we've also explored in our work so far is where demand is coming from. And we're seeing this coming from a number of places. So demand is where coverage is more than one operator can provide. And some of the key segments we're seeing: airlines, automotive, asset tracking, telematics, in-transit connectivity. And we have looked at a number of case studies in these sorts of areas. Agriculture is also among there for potentially in-country roaming. We've heard examples of some of the extremely large farms in the US that want to optimize their production using IoT and need coverage which is generally not provided by one single entity. Now, in the automotive sector, seeing very definite demand coming from there, particularly when you consider what might happen to a vehicle if it's built in one country, shipped to another European country, for example, and then goes from country to country. It needs roaming capability to be able to do that. Now, I got a couple of other examples. We looked at Rolls-Royce, who are using IoT in their jet engines, which are not sold to airlines these days, but are leased. And the IoT functionality there is to optimize the operation of the engine, and by making small changes, they can save vast amounts of money in terms of operating. So the characteristics of this sort of demand that's coming through is that organizations wanting global cellular coverage need to work with more than one operator, and this might not be as easy as it sounds. We all know that mobile network operators are often active in multiple countries, but the footprint of those countries doesn't always match where demand is sitting. So they need services with a global footprint. And what we're seeing at the moment is that MVNOs are best placed to meet that demand. We're also seeing the launch of more and more NB IoT networks, and there's been talk of roaming agreements, and we've seen a few announced already, but these agreements are quite piecemeal and still only cover a range of markets and not truly global coverage. Other technologies cropping up, LoRa and Sigfox, which are offering infill coverage, sometimes campus type coverage. We're going back to this point of device lifespan with a device that's more than 10 years in the field. Some form of future-proofing is necessary, particularly when we're seeing the sunsetting of 2G and 3G networks. We have to ensure that the ability to migrate to a newer network is in there, and that roaming providers take this into account. And we've heard a couple of mentions of 5G already, and the initial assessment of 5G is that roaming seems to be an afterthought on 5G, and that it's not truly geared to a roaming type solution, and this may well affect how the market is going to develop. So I've made that point already. In terms of monetizing, MNOs don't have the necessary footprint to deliver solutions to all those enterprises that are needing it. So enterprises we see are looking for a single provider that can offer IoT connectivity, and they're looking for someone that has multiple agreements in place, is flexible to where the enterprise may need coverage in the future, is a specialist connectivity provider, and then importantly has things like a single management and billing system and is network agnostic. Again, the word education comes up, and it's a theme that runs through MEF when we're looking at our various ecosystems, and becoming a trusted provider is critical in terms of rolling out solutions. MVNOs, good position. They've got agreements with 500-600 operators, and there's no need for the enterprise to negotiate separate roaming agreements with a mobile network operator in each market. In terms of MVNOs, we'll see the emergence of perhaps some more specialist MVNOs on particular market segments, and certainly from work we've seen from Red Dawn Consulting, they were saying that the number of MVNOs will increase quite rapidly over the next 5 years. There's also the question of the characteristics of what IoT roaming traffic carries, and organizations really taking into account usage policy and charging for data volumes when there's a requirement for high bandwidth and low latency. There's also seen discussion about what about signaling on IoT, because sometimes the amount of signaling overhead can be greater than the revenue that they're getting from the connectivity element. Are there going to be new commercial models? We're not seeing anything radical coming out, but we might see adaptations of commercial models. And you certainly see players coming up with innovative pricing packages. And as I said, particularly driving market development as prices start to fall. At the moment, IoT pricing is not regulated, unlike in certain regions like Europe, for other mobile services, and competition is driving down the price. We're seeing that the ability to provision in multi-countries and provide effective billing platforms for enterprises and providing platforms that are easy to use is a very strong requirement. And also the need for real-time business analytics and intelligence. After all, a lot of IoT's value is in data, and having this analysis capability is important. Right, so I'll stop there on roaming and invite any questions, observations that people have in this area.
As a summary then, And the summary would be, for what you say, is maybe roaming is not working. Roaming has been designed for people, and roaming for things is different. They don't have nationalities, they have origins. And how do you compare the laws which allows roaming up to 25 days with something that would be permanently roaming? So everything seems to be an afterthought and a bit of a band-aid you try to put on roaming. The success of MVNOs, and you've seen 16 billion as the number I've seen, right? As that you mentioned of access for IoT. 6 billion, okay. That's much lower. But the 6 billion is the success of the IoT, and is within solving solutions such as roaming doesn't work very well. So if I understand the success of our members so far is linked of how close we're trying to avoid the experiencing of the problems of the failures of roaming solutions or other solutions which might not be perfectly designed with things in mind that didn't have things in mind. And what's going to happen now? Because I mean, we've seen GSMA tried to coalesce and so on, and the operators didn't seem to come up with one single solution. So from your crystal ball, as a result of that, what's going to happen to all your your crystal balls? Can you see something in the future that says that's the end of a problem? Is there going to be an end to roaming problems?
Not yet.
No. Give me some future of hope somewhere, or no?
No, I've heard two schools of thought on this. I mean, one saying that the operators are too interested in big revenue chunks, and by comparison, this is quite small, so why should we put a lot of interest, a lot of effort into it? On the other, you're seeing operators like Orange that have an MVNO type offering. I'm more persuaded by the former, that it's something that the MNOs aren't necessarily interested in, and they can still make a wholesale margin on connectivity, so they're leaving it to other parties to validate the market. And if I'm thinking what's the future, I'm thinking particularly as we get into more specialist services, it's not something that the MNO will necessarily do well. They're interested in big boxes of revenue coming from interesting and predictable places.
And so there is some light out there. What is a challenge for somebody and for the industry is an opportunity from some others to actually make an MVNO solution that works across, has a global foot, and solve some of the problems. So it's good for somebody. Maybe the overall rhythm of development in IoT, which has not been as high as expected, is probably linked to the fact that there has been some of the stumbling blocks somewhere. But good news for some, harder for some.
Yeah, I must admit I'm struggling a little bit with your problem statements here. Talking about footprint of operators not being sufficient, etc. That's why we have roaming, right? So, so I don't get it. Some of these things, but if you look at this going forward, I think you mentioned 5G, that it's not really sorted yet, which is true. There are people that say that, okay, maybe there will be no roaming in 5G. Maybe there will be other ways of dealing with it, with some kind of extended connectivity into other countries, etc., like that. And then you have a network slice that extends into another country, but again, based on some kind of commercial agreements, of course. And I'm not working for an operator now, but I have been working for Telenor for 30 years. So. And we have, for instance, or Telenor has, for instance, a company called Telenor Connection. And they provide services to, together with Volvo, for instance, and which actually do automotive roaming all over the place. So there are, for existing services, there are roaming agreements, and if you are in a car, you are roaming all the time, right? Yeah. Basically. So it's which has been a debate, actually, if permanent roaming is going to be allowed, etc., from a regulatory point of view, or within the GSMA. So there's a lot of questions here, but I think I think roaming will be sorted out here for IoT. For 5G, maybe there will be no roaming at all. I don't know. So, but it will be sorted in some other ways. And I'm not sure what you mean with MVNOs, to be honest. So, if you can clarify that, that would be good. So.
Do you want Advisor?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. As we are in that specific business, we do see a lot of MVNOs starting up now with specific focus areas within the IoT domain, where I agree that it will be hard for most of the traditional telcos basically to go into these areas, like specific areas. I think we have a great example of an MVNO that is focused on the security side of the things here with Iot. You see them everywhere around here. I think that's a really good example of where there's a really something to play in a specific field within the IoT domain. But it also goes for verticals, that goes for automotive or whatever. Like, you can go into certain areas. IoT will be, as we've seen in the predictions many times now, it will be big. So there's a lot of playing field, I guess, to grab a piece of that and build a decent MVNO business on top of that. So that's definitely one observation. I completely agree. Our company, we see that happening already. Like, it's not a future thing. It's actually a big demand already, and really interesting to follow that. Secondly, going into the roaming challenges, I think there is a really interesting solution to it, or at least a potential mitigation for any challenges going forward. And I think that's the EU-ICC eSIM technology. We strongly focused on that specific technology because it gives you more flexibility towards the future to manage whatever influences we will see in certain countries. We have that right now, right? We have roaming agreements in place, and we do see it sometimes shifting in certain countries like Turkey. New regulation comes in, and if you have, I think, the EU-ICC technology, you are at least able to work with an operator directly, for example, onboard a profile and solve the problem that arises at that moment. So I think eSIM is definitely the right bet in that perspective.
Thank you for that comment. I deliberately left eSIM out of this presentation today, so it's good that it is good that you brought it in. Yeah, it is a topic we're looking at, and if you get a chance to look at our last roaming webinar, we tackle a few issues around eSIM and also around permanent roaming, two topics we're not necessarily covering today. Okay, any more observations, Dario, or should we move on to identity?
No, let's ask if there's any more. I mean, you've already answered. And we can go on more details on why we think there are issues and what might not work. And I think you might be right there. There might be no roaming. Maybe there will be something else. But I think, listening, that there is a problem with roaming in IoT, not in people communications. In IoT, it's a slightly different thing. But challenges. Come to the next meeting and tell us.
Yeah,
we like that.
Interested to know the mobile operator perspective. They're probably not as well represented. But no, we have a couple of members, but yeah, we've got a range of connectivity providers who give us different perspectives. Yep. Okay.